Hello, my narcissistic abuse family. Today, I'm talking about a term that makes people very uncomfortable based off of just the name of it. It's very controversial, we'll say, because people don't like the term, but it's emotional incest. I know. It's also called covert incest. It could be, I guess, interchanged with the term parentification, which is a little less offensive. But we're speaking in regard to the dysfunctional dynamics set by a narcissistic parent. Covert incest was defined in the 1980s as an emotionally abusive relationship between a parental figure and a child that does not involve the physicality of sexual intercourse or incest in terms of a physical exchange. This term, incest, has led to criticism of the concept for dramatically loosening the definition of incest, making child abuse seem more prevalent than it actually is, and being overused and unsubstantiated. I get that, but when you hear what emotional incest is, you're going to be horrified that it definitely probably applies to you and your situation if you had a narcissistic parent. Covert incest, emotional incest, it's a type of abuse in which a parent looks to their child for emotional support that would be normally provided by another adult. The effects of covert incest on children when they become adults are thought to mimic actual incest, but to a lesser degree. So, as I was saying, you could interchange the term parentification, but the thing with that is parentification is when a parent uses their child to behave as the adult in the dynamic. So, I mean, this happened to me as well, where, say, if your mother is the narcissist and she comes to you acting childish, and you find yourself being the responsible adult in the equation, that's parentification for sure. So, but oh, this is so like disturbing. So, emotional incest is when the parent starts dumping adult issues onto the child, such as money or looking for emotional support. Something I read that was really applicable was, I don't know where it is now, but it was something like the adult is constantly looking for adoration from the child. If your parent was a narcissist, no doubt you experienced that. I sure the heck did. So it's like in public or private, the parent is always fishing for reassurance or compliments or something. They label that as emotional incest. Or when the parent comes to the child about issues that they should be conferring with their spouse about. As I said, this comes to mind for me about money, something that two adults in a marriage or relationship would typically field these types of issues together. The parent is coming to the child and like dumping that on the child, and the kid is like totally not equipped to handle this type of burden of the parent fishing for emotional support. I remember this so much. And even into my adulthood, like my mother would always come to me like complaining about money and things like that, to the point where I would feel like it's my responsibility to fix it, right? Because they also train you to feel that you are indebted to them, that it's somehow your job as their child to take care of them, to care for them. Again, it's kind of like a blurred boundary, like with parentification and emotional incest. They're very similar. Often, when the golden child experiences emotional incest, they grow up to be very resentful. They say that if a parental unit ends in divorce and one of the children was used for emotional incest to fill the void of the relationship that was non-existent between the parents, the child will become resentful of the parent that they were essentially standing in for. Rightfully so. This is, again, it's got all of the elements of a narcissistic mother or parent with the triangulation you'll see here, because they're putting all of this on their child, which a child's life should be carefree, sunshine, rainbows, imagination all day long, should not be dealing with adult issues. And a narcissistic parent doesn't care. They put their needs ahead of the child, and the child suffers because of it. In adulthood, this can result in alcoholism, other substance addictions. It can interfere with emotional connections. As a victim of this, you're hesitant or reticent to have an emotional connection with anyone, to forge that type of relationship, because you've been used and abused by your own parent. You were burdened with that early in life and it did not feel good. So now you have an aversion to it, you have a negative association. As an adult, you find it difficult to have meaningful emotional connections with other adults. Emotional incest is horrific. It's just a prime example of a way that a narcissistic parent, again, will put their needs ahead of the child, and they'll dump these things onto the child, forcing them into assuming adult responsibilities or an adult role. As I said, I have endless examples of this, which is kind of horrifying, because the primary narcissist was my mother, mother again in quotes, but she would always, ironically, she would always tell me, "I'm not your friend, I'm your mother." But then, in terms of emotional incest, she'll act like you're her best friend, confiding in you with her emotional needs, or about money, as I said, or things of that nature. It's so conflictual. It causes the worst cognitive dissonance for a child. It's just so mentally abusive, emotionally, psychologically abusive, because it's very confusing. As a child, this is supposed to be your caregiver, the adult in your life. You're not supposed to be the one fielding these types of issues. And during emotional incest, the parent will put these difficult adult issues onto the child. So I cannot speak for the golden boy, but I can only assume that he experienced this, because they do say that when there is a golden child in the mix, that they experience emotional incest to a greater degree, where the parent is confiding in them or going to them for emotional support. The part about where the adult should be interacting with the other adult in the dynamic, like the mother and the father, and they're not doing that, they're going to the child. That makes all the sense in the world, because my toxic duo, immature to the max, both of them. Wasn't just the narcissist, it was my enabling father as well. I quotes around all that stuff. But he was for sure the enabler, but he was painfully immature, the two of them, throughout life. So the fact that she was coming to us kids with looking for emotional support and pinning these heavy issues onto us, it makes sense, because narcissists are horribly immature and unable to conduct themselves appropriately as an adult. So the term is quite offensive, rightfully so. Anything with incest in it is cringeworthy. But in terms of emotional incest, now you know what it is. I hear it said often, and I always wondered exactly what it was referring to. Now I know, and of course I experienced it. But covert incest, I don't know, they gotta come up with a better term. Like I said, I think parentification is kind of a better reference, but again, it's a little different, because parentification is when the parent switches roles with the child and they put you in the role of being the responsible caregiver. And the difference with this emotional incest is that they're just burdening their child with adult issues and kind of confiding in them as if they're a peer rather than a dependent. It's extremely messed up, as is everything regarding narcissistic parents. They will twist your mind in ways you never imagined. And that's the thing about emotional incest, is it's very hard to detect, like all of the abuse we experience. If it's not physical or sexual, like outsiders, teachers, neighbors, friends, family, they're less likely to detect it. And the child as well, I've said this with other victims we've exchanged, that this was normalized for us. So we didn't see anything wrong with it. We were just like, oh, this is how it is, right? Like everyone goes through this, because we didn't know any better. This was normalized. We had nothing to compare it to. We were often isolated, because narcissistic parents will pick off outsiders like it's their job, because they don't want anyone infiltrating their dysfunction. They don't want anyone contesting the abuse that they inflict or challenging them, their authority, or the dysfunctional dynamic that they have set in their dysfunctional unit. But this is emotional incest, when a parental figure burdens a child with adult-like issues that they should be conferring with another adult about. So I hope I provided you with some useful information. Please like, subscribe, share with anyone you think it's applicable to. We are bumped, we are bruised, but more than anything, we are blessed, because we're better people out of this horrific experience. We have more compassion and kindness and appreciation for the people in our lives that genuinely love us, that we love. So I love you all. I will be back next week.